In the section 3, we will be discussing about decentralized applications, how to create another decentralized application, a simple example, and then we will be discussing about Hyperledger briefly. Today in this video, I'll be explaining about creating functions to interact with the blockchain, how to create the instance of the contract and how to use it, what is ABI, and how is it useful for us. So ABI, which stands for Application Binary Interface, is used to interact from our code with the smart contract functions. The ABI specifies what are the set of functions available, the parameters to the functions, and all. So a smart contract is stored as bytecode once it is compiled. Bytecode is binary data. This bytecode is stored into blockchain under a specific address, also known as contract address. So we need to use this ABI in our script to let the program know what functions are there in smart contract to interact with. Then every time we deploy the contract to an address, we need that address because we need to specify in our front end, in our code, that the so and so contract is present on so and so address so that it can go to that address, fetch the contract. Now, after all those, we can either initialize the Web3 or can state the MetaMask induced Web3 in our code. I'll be demonstrating this shortly. And after all these steps, now we can create the instance of the contract and then interact with its functions from our front end. So let's dive back into our HTML code. So as you can see, we stopped here previously. I explained all the buttons and the text box which are present in the front end web page. And now let's dive into the script. So in the script, as you can see here, the window.eventListener and in the brackets which is load, comma the function. This makes sure that if this constraint is not true, we will initialize the new Web3 and will console log that the MetaMask is injected. So this is the way we can make sure that the Web3 is initialized, and that is through MetaMask. So let me go through the code line by line and explain it to you. Here's the if statement, which states that if Web3 is not initialized, which is undefined, then initialize the Web3 like this: window.web3 equal to new. New is the keyword to initialize Web3, followed by Web3 and bracket Web3.currentProvider. So here, the current provider changes if we are not using MetaMask. For example, we can use the HTTP server, and to use it, we can use it as web3.providers.http provider, and in the bracket, the localhost port. Since we are using the MetaMask, we'll be using web3.currentProvider, which allows the MetaMask to get induced. And once it is done, the console log will make sure that MetaMask is injected and the output is MetaMask injected. And the next line of code is important. Like I said before, in our web page, what happens is the Ethereum address and the amount will be automatically specified. But how do we do that? I've never explained it. That is done through these lines of code. What here happens is, using the Web3, we'll get the current account address from our MetaMask, which is current accounts and in bracket 0. So what happens here now is, this address will be stored in this text box value. So like I said before, get element by ID is used to get the text box ID which we have specified before. So as you can see, the ID address is for Ethereum address text box. And as you scroll down and see here, document.getElement by ID, in the bracket we specified the exact text box ID, and we equaled, that is, we initialized it with the accounts 0. So this makes sure that in the text box, the first account in our MetaMask is induced. And after that, the value, that means the amount text box, is equal to 1. We hard coded it here, and we can change it depending on our transaction. So after all this if statement, if the Web3 is not initialized, then it goes to else clause. And in the else clause, we're stating that we will console log that the Web3 is not initialized and we should try considering MetaMask. So once the Web3 is initialized and according to our automatic process that the text boxes should be having the MetaMask address automatically, now we will be going through the ABI. So remember I said ABI is useful for the program to understand what are the set of functions available and the parameters to it. So let me explain how can you get the ABI from our compiled contract. So as you can see here, this is our code for our contest. So whenever you compile the code, you'll be having a button called details in the remix IDE. So when you click on it, you'll get the name, the contract name, the metadata, bytecode, and then comes the ABI. You can get the ABI by copying it using this button. And after copying it, you can get back to your code and you can paste it here. So here I'm creating a variable and which is equal to web3.eth.contract and in the bracket ABI. This is how you need to specify the contract ABI. And now once the contract ABI is present in this variable, you can go down and then you need to specify the address of the contract. Where the deployed contract is present, that address you need to mention here. So we're creating another variable in which we're storing the contract address. And that can be done using the ABI variable dot at keyword and in the bracket the address. And once that is done, we're using the console log to just say the contract name. And after all this, we are ready and we can dive into creating the functions to interact with the contract. So in the next video, I'll be explaining about the integrating function to our front-end buttons.